guys, welcome back to the SUPES channel. My name is Matthew Ramos, and on this channel I am to entertain, inform, and inspire using the topic of discussion as always, which is superheroes. So guys, today I'm going to dive deep into the character of Spider-Man within the MCU. First off, I would like to say that I love Marvel Studios. I thank Marvel Studios for all of the movies, all of the awesome characters they have given us. But, you know, with all of the good and all of the amazing that Marvel Studios has brought us, I think it's also very important that we also highlight the things that they can make better. And Spider-Man in the MCU is definitely something they can make better. And I'm not holding back when I make this video because I think it's criminal. I think it's criminal to do what Marvel Studios has done with the character of Spider-Man and the characters that surround him. So with that being said, right before I get into breaking down Spider-Man within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, make sure to stay to the end of the video, guys, because I'm giving away an entire SUPES merch line. Now without further ado, let's break down the character of Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So first off, I understand that a ton of you guys are fans of Tom Holland's Spider-Man, and so am I. I love Tom Holland as Spider-Man, but I want to make it clear that all the criticisms I'm about to make have nothing to do with the actors that play these roles. These criticisms are solely based on Marvel Studios and the way they have designed and written the characters of Spider-Man and the characters that surround him. To start off on a good note, the introduction of the MCU Spider-Man in Captain America Civil War is flawless. There's not one thing I would change about it because it was absolutely perfect from beginning to end. When Peter Parker entered the screen without even showing his face yet, Marvel did a brilliant job in showing who Peter Parker is as a character by having him carry a DVD player that he found, which he will later experiment on. Then as Peter makes his way into the room, we see that he is very socially awkward with his interaction with Tony Stark in front of Aunt May, which is a Peter Parker characteristic. But it's when we are taken to Peter's room where the real magic happens. Once Tony and Peter are alone in the room, Tony admits that he has been watching Peter as Spider-Man and knows what he can do. Yet, Peter denies that he is Spider-Man time and time again and refuses to tell Tony Stark, the most well-known superhero in the world, about his secret identity. It's only until Tony finds the suit that he finds out that Peter is actually Spider-Man. The most interesting thing about this entire interaction though is that Peter is actually annoyed by Tony Stark. He's not fangirling over the most popular superhero in the world and instead wants him to leave him alone so he can just go back to being Peter Parker. Then we see what Peter's true motivations are, and they stay true to every other incarnations as Peter feels that with great power comes great responsibility. I can't tell you guys enough how perfect Spider-Man was in Captain America Civil War. And after I came out of watching the movie, I couldn't stop saying how Tom Holland is the best Spider-Man. That's how much I loved him in Captain America Civil War. I also love him in Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. Even though we didn't get to see much of him in Endgame, but in Infinity War, he delivers this one line that shows his huge sense of responsibility.
You hear me? Don't pretend you thought this through. I know you didn't. You could not have possibly thought this through.
You can't be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man if there's no neighborhood.
So I've concluded that the Russo brothers know how to perfectly handle the character of Spider-Man. From him being in Captain America Civil War, to Avengers Infinity War, to Avengers Endgame. It's John Watts and his team that failed to properly deliver a Spider-Man that is worthy of his past incarnations. Starting with Spider-Man Homecoming. In this movie, we see Peter is now a Tony Stark fangirl. He spends the majority of the movie trying to prove to Tony that he is worthy enough to be an Avenger. But even worse, he hates school. We see that school is just one of the obstacles that's in Peter's way. Don't get me wrong, I would be the same way if I had Peter's powers, but I'm not Peter Parker. Peter Parker is a kid who loves school with every single fiber of his being. That's where he wants to be. He doesn't want to be fighting crime, putting his life in danger time and time again, and this leads me to one of my major problems with MCU Spider-Man, is that being Spider-Man isn't a curse to Peter Parker. The only reason Peter Parker is Spider-Man is because of Uncle Ben. That's it, Uncle Ben. Because Peter failed to use his powers when he needed to, the man that meant the most to him died because of him. So now Peter feels the responsibility to always use his powers when he needs to in order to be there for Aunt May the way he couldn't be there for Uncle Ben. I know a ton of people say we don't need to see the same origin story all over again, and I agree, but that doesn't mean that just because we don't see the origin, that also means it should carry no weight and mean nothing. Plus, because Marvel likes to do it differently, they had the perfect opportunity to show a flashback scene when Peter referenced what May had been through in Spider-Man Homecoming.
May cannot know. I cannot do that to her right now. You know? I mean, everything that's happened with her, please.
In the comics, Uncle Ben actually dies in his home, in the arms of Aunt May by the same burglar that Peter failed to stop. I'm sure most of you didn't know that, so Marvel could have shown Ben's death and could have done it differently at the same time. But Uncle Ben virtually doesn't exist in the MCU. Instead, Tony Stark fills the void, but Tony Stark could never ever come close to being Uncle Ben, because Uncle Ben is the reason. Uncle Ben is the reason Peter is cursed with living this double life as both Spider-Man and Peter Parker. But in the MCU, Peter is Spider-Man because he likes it. If we really look at Peter Parker in the MCU, he's way more like Miles Morales than he is like Peter Parker. Unlike Peter Parker, Miles actually loves being a superhero and wants to continue to do it. Hell, they even gave Peter Parker Miles Morales' best friend, Ned Leeds, instead of someone like Harry Osborn. So they already gave the relationship between Peter and Uncle Ben no meaning, so you would think that they would double down on the relationship between Peter and Aunt May. But they don't. Instead, Marvel said, let's make Aunt May hot to be different from the other versions, and yeah, that's just good enough. I hate to say it, but Aunt May doesn't even feel like family to Peter. She feels more like a babysitter than she does actual family. And it's disrespectful to Spider-Man fans and to the character that both Stan Lee and Steve Ditko created to use Aunt May only for the sole purpose of being a thirst trap for forced comedy with guys that want to get with her. I liked it in Civil War with her and Tony, but it's disgraceful when it becomes her only purpose as this repetitive joke continues in both Spider-Man Homecoming and Spider-Man Far From Home. Aunt May in the Raimi trilogy was perfectly played by Rosemary Harris, but even this version of the character still wasn't accurate to Aunt May from the comics, because in the comics, after the loss of Uncle Ben, Aunt May is constantly worried about losing Peter 24/7, and that's before she even finds out that he's Spider-Man. After Peter lost Uncle Ben, Aunt May became that person that Peter would constantly fall back on. She was the one that would help Peter back up every single time he's been knocked down, but in the MCU she's not. In the Raimi trilogy, Peter always went to Aunt May to tell him what he did wrong and how he can fix his mistakes moving forward.
I hurt her, Aunt May. I don't know what to do.
You start by doing the hardest thing. You forgive yourself. I believe in you, Peter. You're a good person. And I know you will find a way to put it right.
The closest thing we ever got to this was when Peter was crying about losing his suit. But Spider-Man should never ever feel like his suit is what makes him Spider-Man in the first place. And Aunt May never even gave him advice. She just consulted him and then told him that he smells and that he should go take a shower. Now as we look at Spider-Man Far From Home, Aunt May knows that Peter is Spider-Man. But instead of being worried sick, instead of giving him a hard time because she doesn't want to lose him, she uses him. Yes, she uses him for charity events, and the idea that Aunt May is fine with Peter being Spider-Man even after the tragic events of Avengers Infinity War, and then goes the extra mile to use him for her benefit, makes me want to throw up. In Spider-Man Far From Home, they really had the opportunity to strengthen the relationship between Aunt May and Peter with an event like the snap from Avengers Infinity War. What if Aunt May stayed alive and mourned Peter's death for 5 years the same way she mourned Uncle Ben? Then, when Peter came back in Endgame, she would value him more than ever and worry about him even more. But she doesn't. Again, instead, she allows him to go on trips around the world. She allows him to continue to be Spider-Man without worrying one bit. And then, we also find out that she's using him for personal gain. On top of all that, we find out that Aunt May doesn't care at all about Uncle Ben. How do we know? First, we see no discomfort in the interactions between Aunt May and Happy, and you would think that it would be tough for Aunt May to engage in a romantic relationship with another man after she had such a traumatic experience with losing the love of her life in her past relationship. But she shows no discomfort. It's like Uncle Ben never existed. Another piece of evidence that shows Aunt May never cared about Uncle Ben is when Peter takes Uncle Ben's suitcase to Europe and then it gets destroyed.
Let's go. Where are your bags? Oh, right, they got blown up.
Yeah.
No one cares. I know some people will say, oh, it's just a suitcase, But it's not. It's Uncle Ben's suitcase. And that shit carries so much meaning, but again, we see that no one cared about the suitcase when it got destroyed in Europe. I'm also going to address Spider-Man's villains, because Spider-Man's villains aren't Spider-Man villains, they're Iron Man villains. Vulture had all of this animosity built up towards Tony Stark, not Spider-Man. Same thing with Mysterio. These are both two people who got screwed over by Tony Stark in the past, and I thought Peter fought for the little guy, but he's actually fighting for the big guy in Tony Stark, who has screwed over so many people. Tony Stark is an amazing character and an amazing hero, but he wasn't a perfect one. So instead of trying to understand these villains, Peter actually ends up fighting for the big guy whose power and influence has caused people to turn to lives of crime. The next point I want to address is that Peter has way too much help. I get it, he lives in a universe filled with superheroes, but that doesn't mean he should be put out of harm's way and never have to face anything on his own. In Spider-Man Homecoming, Peter is saved by Iron Man after Vulture drops him in the lake. Peter is then saved once again when Iron Man comes to the rescue to save the fairy. When Peter is getting his butt whipped by Shocker, he is then saved once again by Ned, who assisted Peter with his web shooters. And then in the final battle, if it weren't for Vulture's tech blowing up, he would have gotten away and would have never been defeated. Then in Spider-Man Far From Home, Peter has the help of Mysterio in all of the battles that people's lives were at risk. When Peter is beaten by Mysterio, he is saved by his new butler, Happy, who helps Peter in the final battle by protecting his friends and keeping them out of danger. Peter versus Mysterio in the final battle was awesome, but Peter wasn't alone in this mission. So we've seen time and time again how Peter Parker continues to have so much help by his side, and this leads me into my next point, which is that he doesn't have any consequences. Again, going back to Spider-Man Homecoming, during the ferry fight, Peter nearly killed everyone on that boat, and the only consequence is that he loses his suit. In another part of the movie, Peter goes to investigate tombs and abandons his team on their competition day, yet even with Peter not there, they still win, which leads directly into another scene where Ned is carrying alien technology that Peter didn't know was explosive, and after the Washington Monument incident, there were no consequences. There's another scene where Peter's fighting thugs trying to rob an ATM, which leads to Mr. Dunmore's shop getting blown up. Finally, our first real consequence. Except Mr. Delmore survived, so did his cat, and the shop was completely back to normal in Spider-Man Far From Home. Also in Spider-Man Far From Home, Peter irresponsibly gives up Edith to Mysterio after 2 conversations. Edith, the last thing that Tony left for Peter, and he gives it up after 2 freaking conversations. But even then, by the end of the movie, Edith is back in Peter's hands and there were no consequences. The only real consequence Peter has faced is being so irresponsible not to care about his secret identity, showing his face to everyone, and even eating with Mysterio at a bar with people being present. But what happened to Peter, who was so cautious of his secret identity, he wouldn't even admit it to Tony Stark? I guess that Peter just doesn't exist anymore. This lack and sense of responsibility all led to Peter's secret identity getting revealed to the world, and I'm so excited to see where this goes in Spider-Man 3, but we've really seen Tom Holland's Spider-Man in 5 movies, which is the same number of times we've seen Tobey and Andrew combined, and this was his first consequence. From the lack of responsibility, to the lack of consequences, to the way Marvel treats its villains, to the way Marvel treats the 2 most important characters to Peter Parker and Uncle Ben and Aunt May, the MCU has shown that it truly doesn't understand the character of Spider-Man and the characters that mean most to him. The world of Spider-Man in the MCU carries no weight. Meaning is at the center of a fan's fulfillment when it comes to anything. A clear example of this would be this scene.
Here, kiddo, happy birthday. You need it more than I do.
No, I can't take that.
Yes, you can. You can take this money from me. For God's sake, it's not much. Now take it. And don't you dare leave it here. Oh, I'm sorry. It's just that I miss your Uncle Ben so much.
Those $20 carry so much more meaning than anything in the world of MCU Spider-Man. If there's one thing I've learned about Spider-Man movies, it's that Spider-Man movies aren't about Spider-Man. They're about Peter and the relationships he has with the people he loves most. And in the MCU version of Spider-Man, there's only one relationship that carries any sort of meaning in Peter's life, and it's the relationship he has with Tony Stark. That is something we can all appreciate, however, when the meaningful relationships of Uncle Ben and Aunt May, who are the reasons that he's Spider-Man in the first place, carry no weight and are virtually non-existent, it's hard to appreciate any other relationship that Peter has. This is why I feel the way that I feel about MCU Spider-Man. It's not because of the actors, because I love them. It's because the way Marvel, and mainly John Watts, has written the character of Spider-Man and the characters that surround him. I hope you guys can understand where I'm coming from, as this is my favorite Marvel character of all time, and I for sure wouldn't be the man that I am today if it weren't for him. So there you guys have it. I understand I'm probably gonna get a lot of hate for this video, but what type of man would I be if I don't stay true to what I believe? And ultimately, this is my favorite Marvel character of all time, and I wouldn't be the man that I am if it weren't for this character. So I want to see justice done for this character and for the characters that surround him. With that being said, guys, thank you guys for watching this video. Now getting into giveaway details. I'm giving away an entire Supes merch line. All you have to do to enter this giveaway is like this video, comment down below, subscribe, and hit that bell notification on my channel to get notified when these videos go up. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys next time.